It breaks my heart to say that it's not that surprising, but to think that this book would be banned in the very community in which it's set, where the author lives. And yes, it is addressing painful, hard, excruciating topics, but it's 100% real.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from Joe Steiniger and Mary McDonald in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
My son is a sophomore in high school, and like any teenage boy throughout history, I think his love for reading has kind of wavered up and down, back and forth over the years. But this year, thanks to an English teacher he really loves, the stack of books, I would say on his nightstand, but really it's the corner of the couch that he inhabits, the stack of books has grown once again. I think back on my own English teachers through my school years, and they were really the reason books have always been huge in my life. Mrs. Quillen, my sixth grade teacher, read a couple of books to us out loud that are still such a big part of my life and who I am that if I see a copy of one of those books at a book sale, I almost always buy it. But it's easy to forget that English teachers don't just turn us on to books. They are voracious readers even outside the classroom. I know, amazing. Case in point for today's guest. Kelsey Francis teaches English in Saranac Lake. She's also a storyteller you might have heard on the Howl podcast, a really good storyteller, in fact. Not too long ago, though, she read a new book that was so compelling that it led her down a path she never expected. Kelsey Francis, welcome to Northwards.
Well, thanks for having me, Mitch.
So let me start actually by having you rewind the tape of your life for some months. Can you share what it was about Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead that so struck a chord with you?
Sure. I've been a big fan of her work really since I was in college. And so last year when this book came out, I knew some friends were reading it, and I didn't get a chance to read it until like late winter, early spring. And honestly, it was from the very first page, the narrator, Demon's voice instantly struck me as one very familiar to me as a high school English teacher of 23 years. I recognized so many of my former students in his voice.
For people who have not read it, present company included, although I'm going to have to rectify that. Can you give us a quick thumbnail sketch of the novel?
Sure. It's first-person narration from the point of view of a young man who goes by the name of Demon. That's not his real name. It's Damien, but everyone calls him Demon, and he lives in the southwest corner of Virginia, very, very southwest corner, in a rural area in Appalachia, not unlike our own here in the North Country. And he's had a heck of a life. He is an orphan. He goes in and out of multiple foster care homes and struggles in school and ultimately battles an opioid addiction and just really has one struggle after another. And as you're reading it, you can't believe this kid is faced with such hardship, and yet every bit of it is incredibly real. So that's sort of a summary.
And we should note that this is a modernized, Americanized retelling of Dickens here, correct?
Yes, of David Copperfield, yeah. And Barbara Kingsolver has just a fascinating story about how she was inspired to write the book. She'd been trying to write sort of what she called the Great Appalachian Novel and couldn't find a way in, and was actually on another book tour in England and stayed at Bleak House, which is where Dickens wrote David Copperfield, and it's now a bed and breakfast. And while she was staying there, she describes that she was sitting at his desk and sort of was visited by the ghost of Charles Dickens, and he told her to let the child tell the story. And she would just like have this aha moment to let, in this case, Demon tell his own story.
Well, and kind of amazing to think that in some ways Dickens had kind of paved the way for the great Appalachian novel.
Yes, yes, it's pretty remarkable. She said he essentially was her, the framework that she ended up using, and how great of a writer he was. Lay out that framework for her.
And it won, or it shared the Pulitzer Prize for fiction earlier this year. And I gather then it was important for you to share this book with your colleagues.
Yeah. I just could not stop thinking about the book after I finished it and was recommending it to people, and then went to my school district and said, could we get a few copies for just professional development, or, see if there would be some people interested in reading it. And it turns out I was actually the second person who had mentioned it to an administrator, and another colleague had already said, I think this book would be really, would be a great read for our staff. And so, we basically, it was like pitch the idea to the staff and see if anyone's interested. And I thought it might be just me and a few other, book nerds, English teachers, but 75 staff members signed up to read it.
Wow. Did this have any precedent? Had you all gotten together and had like a school-wide read for faculty and staff in the past?
Never. This is the first time, and it just blew everybody away, really. And I'm so glad that this was the first book. It just, I think it really set the bar very high.
Well, and beyond that, the bar was raised even higher because you wrote a letter to Barbara Kingsolver. What did you tell her?
Yeah, so once I knew that my school district was on board with this as a professional development opportunity, I was just overwhelmed by the number of people who were interested. And then she won the Pulitzer. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to write to her, because maybe we're the first school doing this, maybe we're not, but I need her to know how much this book might as well have been set in the North Country. We have so much in common. And so I went on her website and learned that she only takes snail mail, and told her what the book meant to me. I told her what my school was doing. I told her how many students just like Demon I have taught over the years, and just thanked her. And so I dropped it in the mail and then just sort of forgot about it. And then 2 months later, she wrote back to me.
Well, and it's weird because we live in this time when there really are, for most, I'll say celebrities or public figures, ways of reaching out to them, whether we send them a tweet or comment on their Facebook page or some other way, that you had to sit down and write an honest-to-God letter seems significant.
Yeah, I have never done anything like that before. It's not that I've ever written to a famous author before. I don't know what. This book just compelled me to do it. I felt like I needed her to know, and let her know what my community was doing, what my school district was doing, because I thought maybe there's other school districts out there that would be interested in doing something similar. So.
Well, and then the irony is that she writes back to you and you find out kind of the opposite.
Yes. So I got a letter from her at the very end of June. Well, she actually emailed me back because I had included my email address. And she wrote me a lovely response saying how thrilled she was to hear what we were doing and to know what the book meant to me. And then I got to this line where she said, I have a favor to ask of you. And she explained that in her community, the book was to be taught in the AP English Literature class. And her publisher had secured copies for that teacher. And then those copies were sort of mysteriously confiscated with no sort of like public discussion. And so she asked if I had time and was willing to write a letter to the superintendent of that school district explaining to him what the book meant to me and what our whole staff was doing, a big portion of our staff was doing, and really just asked me to advocate for the book's value.
This is the woman that won the Pulitzer Prize, asking you to do this for her.
Yes, exactly. I joke that, when I first got to that line that she had a favor, I thought, oh my gosh, does she need a kidney? Because I'll do whatever she asks. Anything. it just blew me away. So I immediately responded and said, absolutely, I will do this. And I, just asked for a little bit of information, about, to who it should be addressed. And then I actually spent some time online looking up that school district to see what it had in common with mine. I wanted just demographic, and learned that we have a lot in common with the kind of kids that we're teaching and the kind of struggles that families are having in our communities. And so my letter to that superintendent really sort of tapped into that. Like, look, we have a lot in common here, and this is the value of this book. I think not only your staff should read it, but I think your students, these are 12th grade English students taking a college level course, really deserve to see their stories, their community in the literature they read. I hope you reconsider.
You're an English teacher, and presumably you follow the news of book bannings pretty closely. I would imagine that it was probably more of a surprise to hear back from Barbara Kingsolver than to hear that a book had been banned.
Exactly. It breaks my heart to say that it's not that surprising, but to think that this book would be banned in the very community in which it's set, where the author lives. And yes, it is addressing painful, hard, excruciating topics, but it's 100% real, every bit of it.
I guess bring us up to date. I understand you have not heard directly from the superintendent, but maybe things have changed in that district?
Yeah, so when I followed up, basically we just sort of I asked to be, please keep me posted on how things develop. And right before my staff met about, I guess, just over a week ago to discuss the book, I reached out to her office to find out if they had ever heard from the superintendent to see if the book was allowed. And she wrote back to me and said that while they never heard from the superintendent directly, that they did get word from the teacher that the books had been returned. And so they took that as a huge success, which is exactly had been the goal to begin with, to put books in kids' hands, and, just thanked me for what little I did. I mean, I don't know, if it helped at all. I'm sure letters from her also helped, but I just feel really lucky that she included me in part of this.
We were talking about this issue around the station, and it's funny. You and I actually went to the same school districts in suburban Maryland, where certainly when I was there were not a lot of there weren't any books being banned. But I wonder if this whole thing has you thinking back to your own high school days and the kinds of things that were controversial in those days and how they were handled versus what we're seeing today.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I have reflected a lot lately as an English teacher when I hear of all these books being challenged and banned across the country. And that was not remotely ever something that came up in the district where I grew up, and even where I've now worked for 23 years, until it hit the news a few years ago that this starts to happen. And it's just shocking to me, because it feels like we're going back to an era that it's an era I've never even really known in my lifetime, and just really leaves me quite speechless when I think of the irony of banning a book, and yet children are allowed to walk around with a very, very powerful tool in their pocket that will give them access to really anything and everything. But we have to ban books. It's just, the irony of that is really stunning.
It does seem to say something about the district where you teach, that they were able to find the money to buy copies for every staff member that wanted one.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. And yet it also speaks to their willingness to support, ideas coming from the staff, which I really appreciated. I feel really strongly that some of the best professional development comes from what teachers are asking they need for and can provide, in-house. And this book, because it had so much in common with our own community, I thought would speak to all sorts of people. We had, teachers K through 12. We had principals read it. We had administrative assistants read it. We had teaching assistants read it. So, all these individuals who work with and have a role to play in the lives of kids read this book, and it had a profound effect on all of them. The feedback has been remarkable.
I was just going to say, obviously, they are not here to characterize their own responses, but did you get the sense that they felt the same way about this book that you did?
I did, yeah. And we had an evaluation form at the end, and really all of the responses have been 100% this book was relevant to my work, and the importance of just deepening the well of empathy, as I'm calling it, that, reading this book and seeing this whole child's life really play out on the page and, understanding the complexities of all of these issues was just incredibly moving. And everybody's saying, I think we should do something like this again. So hopefully we can.
But puts a lot of pressure on you to find the right book, though.
Yeah, or maybe somebody else. But no, I would do it again. I absolutely would do it again. But yeah, I don't know if we can ever top Demon Copperhead. I really don't.
It does, I think back to when I was a kid, and the real controversial books were all by Judy Blume.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yep. I remember that.
It seems like such an innocent time.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Kelsey Francis, it's a remarkable story, and I'm so glad we got to hear about it from you. And in a time when we hear about so many frustrations that teachers are facing in various circumstances, it's really nice to hear from someone who seems to have had such a positive part of their teaching career happen to them.
Well, thank you. I really feel this whole experience has been a real highlight, both just as an educator and as a lover of books, for sure.
Kelsey Francis is an English teacher at Saranac Lake High School. She and a colleague led an effort to have the school staff read the book Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. That is all for this edition of Northwards. I would love to have your suggestions for future episodes and interviews. You can get in touch through our website, ncpr.org/northwards. Now, here's Ethan Shanty to tell us who makes this humble production possible, besides himself.
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, edited, and produced by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media, Bill Hanel is our digital director, and Doyle Dean is our production manager. Music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To support this show and find more podcasts, visit ncpr.org. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.